Good morning, Yaakov.
Morning, Rabbi. Happy New Year.
Good Baruch Hashem. Okay, let's go. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Mem Vav. We're going to begin today by concluding the final part of the Mishnah on Daf Mem Hey, the Mishnah that spoke about a batzek shebesitkei areva. And the Mishnah said at the end that v'chein le'inyan hatuma. First part of the Mishnah was speaking about how are we to view that dough that was used as a seal in a utensil. First, concerning Pesach, in other words, Bal Yirah, Bal Yamatzah, and as the Mishnah said that it has to do with the size of the dough. If it's smaller than a kazayis, it's batal to the keli. If it's a kazayis or larger, it's not batal to the keli. With all of the details that we learned in the Gemara that further detailed the Mishnah's rule, but in the Mishnah, the rule of Pesach was kazayis versus less than a kazayis. The Mishnah then says v'chein le'inyan hatuma. When we learned the Mishnah yesterday, we explained that the Mishnah al pi pshat is speaking about a keli that became tameh. You have to take it to the mikvah. The ardinim of chatzitza, nothing may interpose between the waters of the mikveh and the utensil. And here you have this dough. Problem is as the Mishnah itself writes, that when it comes to dinei chatzitza, what is of importance, the criterion is whether the owner, whether the balabayis of that keli is makbid, that item, in our case, that the dough is inserted in it, makbid meaning he wants to remove it, then it creates a chatzitza. If the owner plans to leave it there, he's not makbid. Not only does he not care, but he wants it for it to be there. Then it becomes batal to the keli. Has nothing to do l'chu'ura with the size of the dough. And therefore, the problem will be obvious that when the Mishnah says v'chein le'inyan tuma, there's no v'chein. It doesn't run on the same track. It doesn't follow the same rules. That's the problem. And we're going to learn 4 different approaches how to understand the Mishnah. Second part, on Daf Mem Vav Amud Aleph, we're going to have a Mishnah that speaks about death dough. Now, I know that we are only going to be following the first explanation of Rashi in the Mishnah, but let's follow one approach. Death dough means that even though a person needed dough, all of the simanim that happens to a dough when it becomes chametzik is not happening to this dough. How are we to view this dough? Since it doesn't have the simanim, like it's not pale enough, it didn't crack, v'chulei, does it mean that it's not becoming chametz? Or no, we say that for some reason it's not discernible, but it is chametz. And if you don't have the normal simanim, then indeed, from when would we say that this dough is chametz? We're going to have on Daf Mem Vav the klal of the 18 minutes, the famous 18 minutes. Really, in the words of Chazal, it has to do with the amount of time that it takes to walk 1 mil. Even though there's really a big machloikis, whether it's 18 minutes, you have shittas that say that it's 24 minutes, but certainly when it comes to chametz and Pesach, we're going to be machmid, we're going to use the smallest of the shiurim, 18 minutes. From there, we're going to speak about other halachas that are connected to the time that it takes to walk, but not 1 mil, 4 mil. We're going to have a few halachas connected to the zman that it takes to walk 4 mil, and then on Daf Mem Vav Amud Aleph, at the bottom of the Amud, we're going to open up a sugi that's going to go for a while. And that will be concerning dough that became chametz on Pesach, on Yom Tiv. When it comes to separating challah, we got ourselves a huge issue. Now appreciate something. When we make a dough and when we separate challah, and now the challah belongs to kohanim, before you gave it to any specific kohen, I'm allowed to bake it. I'm even before I gave it to the kohen. But you cannot bake on Yom Tiv something that may not be consumed. The heter of violating so to say, the malachis. L'tzoyrech oichel nefesh is and miteich shehutra l'tzoyrech hutra nami shaloi l'tzoyrech is taka only because it could be eaten on Yom Tov. If something is tamei and challah that's tamei may only be burnt, it can be used as fuel, but it can't be consumed. You're not allowed to prepare it. And the question will be, what do you do with that challah? What do you do with that challah? We'll speak out more. The big challenge, and we're going to have in the Mishnah. It's really there's 3 tanoim, but it's a two-sided argument, and we're going to go into the dinim of does toivas hana'ah, as we'll explain what that means. Does that mean that I have equity in something, that I may halachically have the benefit of the gratitude or not? And finally, the final topic, which we'll go into the next dafim, will be the topic, the principle of hoil, since. Many times in halacha we say, since something could have happened, we are allowed to view it as if it already happened. So there's going to be ultimately a machloikes amoyroyim, whether we subscribe to the principle of hoil. We're going to speak about some dinim of eruvei tafshilin. We're going to speak about the prohibition of preparing food on Yom Tov for Shabbos. We're going to see whether that's an isur d'oraisa or to begin with only an isur d'rabbanan, and how that links into eruvei tafshilin and a lot more. Chavra, let us start. We left off on Daf Mem Hey Amid Beis, 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Again, the Gemara here is referring back to the Mishnah on Daf Mem Hey, right? We're speaking about the butzeik dough that was inserted in a crack in a kneading trough. Pesach, is it chametz or not? Kazayas or less than a kazayas? And the Mishnah says, "V'chein le'inyan atuma im makbet olav chaytzitz." But v'im roitze b'kiyumai, if you want to leave it there, then it's part of the trough l'chayra, and it doesn't create a chatzitza. Now, just important to quickly chazir that really, when it comes to dinim of tefillah of tahara, there are really 2 issues when it comes to chatzitza, and that is roiv umakbet. These are the rules that we have. In other words, if something is covering the majority of a person or of a keli, and the person is bothered by the fact that there is something that's creating a chatzitza, roiv umakbet, that is what creates a chatzitza midoiraisa. If it's miut and makbet, or roiv ve'enoi makbet, biblically it's not a chatzitza, but rabbinically it's a chatzitza. If something is on the body or in a keli, not roiv, not makbet, then by the letter of the law does not create a chatzitza. But when it comes, for example, by Hilchas Nida, when a woman today goes to the mikvah, lechatchila, we should be careful for there not to be anything, even if it's miut, and even if you're not makbet. That's why we're so strict when it comes to going to the mikvah. That's before the fact. After the fact, if God forbid a woman notices that there was something that was not a part of her body on her body, then one of the first things we have to find out is that if indeed it was miut and ve'enoi makbet, then there isn't even a problem with the Rabbana. Anyways, coming back over here, hakpada, that's halacha l'Moshe Misinai, is essential when it comes to chatzitza. The problem is, fragt the Gemara, how can the Mishnah use the words v'chein umidami? They're not the same. Not v'chein le'inyan tuma. Hassan, but in the first part of the Mishnah, whether that dough is considered chametz or not, are you violating balira bal yamatza? Are you obligated to be mavayated? As the Mishnah itself, b'shiur tali milsa, the Mishnah spoke about the shiur of a kazayis. However, hacha over here by tuma by chatzitza, the Mishnah also writes clearly, bikpei tali milsa. Does the owner object for it being there or not? So it's not v'chein. So answers the Gemara first approach, first attempt. Amar Rav Yehuda. Ema, therefore, because of this kasha, you have to say, ule'inyan hatuma einoi kain. The opposite of v'chein, einoi kain. Amalei abaya ha v'chein le'inyan tumiktani. Now, guys, just to stop here a moment, this is a very big line over here. When it comes to braisas, and the Gemara says by a braisa chasura mechsere, or we make an emendation, that's very easy to accept, because indeed the rule is that many braisas, since they were not put on paper by Rabbeinu HaKadosh, so they were still memorized, many of them got corrupted, as we see throughout Shas. And sometimes we erase a braisa, sometimes we amend, and it goes like 180, not v'chein, but einoi kain. By Mishnayos as a klal, even when the Gemara says on a Mishnah, chasura mechsere v'hachi kitani, don't learn that you have to actually write those words in the Mishnah. No. The words that we have from the Mishnah is medoyek b'yoyse. Mishnais is mamish precise, and there are many levels of understanding the Mishnah. Chasura Mechsera means that we have to, so to say, read in between the lines. So the question is, how much are we allowed to read in between the lines? So Rav Yehuda holds, the Chen le'inyan Tumah doesn't mean that the klal of Kezayis. It means that there is an issue by Pesach, there is an issue by Chatzitza, that's the V'chein, but when it comes to how do you determine whether it's a problem or not, it's Einoi Kain. Rav Yehuda didn't find that to be a problem. Abaye says you can't read that much in between the lines if what you are reading in between the lines goes against that which is written. Since it says V'chein le'inyan Tumah, I don't accept this. So therefore, approach number 2, Elo Amar Rabbi, Hachi Ketani V'chein Daf Memvav, V'chein le'inyan Tziruf Tumah b'Pesach, Tziruf. That when it comes to the dinim of Tziruf, what's the dinim of Tziruf? If you have food that's tamei, for it to impart Tumah, you have to have the size of a kibetza or more. Now, what's going to happen? Listen to this case. You have food that's not in the size of a kibetza. You have this dough that's stuck inside the trough. The food and the dough are touching. Some source of tumah touches them. Now, by the way, for them to become tamei, we spoke out many times, it's a machlekes rishonim, whether there is a need of a minimum shiur for food items to acquire tumah. So independent whether you needed for them to be mitzuref, whether you needed to combine them for them to acquire tumah, that's not the question. The question is now that they became tamei, now another food item has contact with the tamei food and with the tamei dough that are touching each other. If the dough is viewed as oicholin, so therefore it's going to combine with the other food. You have a kibetza, and if it has contact with other foods, it's going to be mitameit. So says Abaya like this, that whether we combine the dough and the crack with another food, to combine it to get to the minimum share of a kibetza to be mitame. So the rule of whether we combine them on Pesach versus ubeshari yemais hashana, whether you combine them during the rest of the year, ika plukta. Here the word plukta doesn't mean a machlekes. Here plukta means it's going to follow distinct, different rules. And as Abaye explains, you have less than a kibetza of food. And that is touching this butzik that's inserted in the trough. Together, you have a kibetza. Now, it's tummy. In the case where it's now tummy, question is now if another tahar food has contact with it. So, bit Pesach, what do we say? Since the isurei chashiv, which is the shir of a kazayas, and as the Mishnah said in the Reisha, that you're over bali rabal yematzeh, so the fact that it's considered food for you to be over, that gives it chashivus, even if you plan to leave it in the trough. It's not going to be bottled because the fact that the Mishnah says you're over, it means we are viewing it as food. So, you can't have it both ways. If you're sadly violating the negative commandment of bali rabal yematzeh, but it's food. So now you taka have a sum total of a kibetza of tamei food, and if other food touches it meaning some of the dough in the trough, which is touching some other tamei food, together there's a kibetza, it's going to be mitztaref to convey tumah. However, since the kibetza talia milsa indeed has nothing to do with the kazayas, the haraya, even if something isn't the size of a kazayas, if the owner wants to leave it there, if the owner is not makbid, it doesn't create a chatzitza. So when will it be mitztaref or not? Im makbid olav. If you mind that it's there, if it bothers you that it's there, in other words, it's not part of the keli, then it will combine. And by the way, it will combine even if it's not the size of a kazayas. If it creates a chatzitza, that means it's food. So that's mitztaref. And the im roitzu b'kiyumai, but if you want to leave it there, and therefore, when again, then a tefilla chatzitza, it's not called a chatzitza, then hareu kahareva, even if it is a kazayas or larger, if it's not on Pesach, so therefore we don't kick in these rules of your over bali rabal matzah. How great is this? So therefore it's not considered food and it cannot combine. Says the Gemara, Maskavul Rava to Abaya, that would be great. if the Mishnah would have mentioned the word tziruf. The Mishnah doesn't mention the word tziruf. Miktani tziruf. The Mishnah only mentions the words chatzitza. And again, chatzitza, whether this dough is chaitzitz, it's not v'chein. It's not about kezayis. So Ella Amarava, the third approach. V'chein means that if you want to bring tahara upon this trough, which means heichidami, that you're going the tami hachareva. This trough became tummy, and uboyile atabule, and you want to toivel it, and you want to take it to the mikvah. So Pesach the isurei choshev, like we mentioned, what makes it choshev? The size. I don't care about akpada. So then, if you have a kazais, it will be chaitzitz. And v'lo yisol kol tefilla, the tefilla won't be valid, even though you don't mind that it's there. However, with there only bikpei the talya milsa. So imak with all of chaitzitz v'miritzi b'kiyumai harehu ka areva. So v'chein le'inyan tuma. On Pesach, we're just adding that on Pesach, itaka has to do with the kazais. That was the original kasha. In other words, when Rabbi Yehuda says that Einoi Kain and Abaye rejected it, so the Nakuda will be is we're like borrowing a little bit also from Abaye's answer. That on Pesach, the din of Chatzitza will be just like the din of Balira Bal Yamatzah. On Pesach, I don't care whether you're makbid or not. If it's a kazayis and the Torah says you're violating Balira Bal Yamatzah, it's always going to be a Chatzitza. That's better. Problem is, Papa, it doesn't say V'chein le'inyan taro. That's the problem. The Mishnah says V'chein le'inyan tuma. You gave a beautiful example where at least on Pesach they are on the same track, but then they get the taro. So le'inyan tuma ktani. So the fourth approach, Elamar Papa, V'chein le'inyan lo hoirid tuma la'areva. For it to become tummy. Now this is gavaldik achap. Guys, we learned this in the end of the first Perek. What did we learn? The rules of how Tameh normally goes down a notch, how an Av HaTameh can be Metama Akeli, but something that's Tameh on a level of a Rishon, biblically cannot be Metama Akeli. Now it's perfect. So guys, think about this. You have a Sheretz that's from the Shmoyne Sheratzim that's dead as an Av. If that Sheretz were to touch the trough, the Keli, then the Keli becomes a Rishon. Nothing to talk about. What happens if the contact that the sheretz had was with the dough in the crack in the keli? If the dough is considered part of the keli, so then everything becomes a rishon. But if the dough is considered food, so that's going to create a leniency b'negei tuma b'negei the keli, because then if it's food, fine. So the sheretz av is matama the dough as a Rishon. I know the Rishon is wedged in the Keli, so it's touching the Keli. So what? A Rishon cannot be metama, a Keli making it into a Sheni Midoirais. So Hechidami could go in the Nagar Sheretz Bahai Batzik. A Sheretz touched the dough that's in the crack. So like this. Be Pesach, the Yisurei Chashuv. Here we're going to find an area where the laws of Tumah are exactly functioning on the same criterion as the dinim of Tumah, Pesach and Tumah are together. Since on Pesach, we said in the Reish of the Mishnah, that if the amount of dough is a kazayis, whether the owner plans to leave it in there or not, I don't care. Kazayis, in the case that we learned in the last year, in the case where kazayis, just the kazayis is a problem, okay? Here, by Tumah, it's going to create a leniency. What's going to be the leniency? Since it's considered food, fine. So therefore, it's chaitzitz. Number one, if you toivel it, it's going to create a chatzitza. But even if you don't toivel it, it's separated from, it's not part of, and therefore, the keli will not become tummy. Sheretz makes the batzek into a rishon. The rishon cannot make the keli into a sheni. However, since the bikpei the talya milsa, so im makpid olav, during the rest of the year, benegei tuma, there's no kazayis. On Pesach, benegei to tuma, there is a kazayis. On the rest of the year, then, if you're makpid, it's chaitzitz. And therefore, again, since it's chaitzitz, the keli is pure, no matter how little the dough is. The dough can be less than a kazayis. If you don't want to leave it there, so therefore, if you were to take it to the mikvah, it's a problem with chatzitza. So it's the other side of the coin. It means it's not part of the keli. So that becomes tummy, but not the keli. But if you want to leave it in there, and even if it's larger than a kazayas, do with a kazayas. If you want to leave it in there, taka doesn't create a chatzitza. Why not? Because it's part of the keli. If it's part of the keli, then the sheret's touching the dough. It's like the sheret's touching any other part of the keli. Hareu ka'areva, and all of the keli becomes tummy on a level of a rishon. Gewaldig. Okay, moving on to the Mishnah. The Rashi brings two ways of learning the Mishnah. We're going to explain the Mishnah based on the first explanation. Batseik hachedesh. That's how the first Lishna and Rashi, with Seides, deaf dough. Rashi uses the example that just like a deaf person, God forbid, when you look at the person, they look wholesome. They have ears, but you don't know what's happening inside of their minds because something is not functioning. Deaf dough means when you look at the dough, it looks like dough. But we don't know what's happening inside. We don't know whether it's becoming chametz dik or not. Now, we already quoted on Daf Mem Ches, and that on Daf Mem Ches, we're going to have this concept of shiur. We learned about the various stages that a dough undergoes as it becomes chametz dik. There is the beginning of it becoming chametz dik, called shiur, not chametz gamur. Then it becomes bonafide chametz. Step number one is it becomes pale. Step number two is it starts to crack with little cracks. Skinny cracks, short cracks. Step number three is when the cracks completely start to interlace one with the other. Rav Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, even according to Rav Meir, that says that if it becomes really pale, at least that's shiur. The Mishnah, according to Rav Meir, here would mean it's not even fully pale. It means the first step. The first step.
I just wanted to ask a question, but continue.
Okay, the first step of non-complete chametz is also not there. But it doesn't make sense because it should have been there. So that's batzei kachedesh. Why should it be there? We'll see, it's about time. There is a certain amount of time that if you don't manipulate the dough, if you leave the dough sitting, it's going to become chametzik. So just because it doesn't look like it, we can't by Pesach say, okay, if it doesn't look like it, this dough didn't turn into chametz. We're not allowed to say that. Says the Mishnah, if you made two doughs at the same time, one of them is already with the simanim of chametz, and this one is the deaf dough. Since you made them at the same time, we have to presume that for whatever reason, it's not the simanim of chametz are not there, but it's only a siman, not a siba. It is chametz. Yeah, Yaakov, what's your question?
I just wanted to confirm that all these simanim of turning into chametz, this is all before baking, right?
All before it's baked. The moment it's baked, that's the klal, or the moment dough or even flour is scalded, theoretically, it can never become chametz again. Says the Gemara, what happens if im ein sham kayotze boy? You didn't make two doughs at the same time. For you to say, since the other one already has the simanim, so this one also we have to presume it's becoming chametz. So here, guys, this is the big rule. Amar Abba Amar Abshum and Lakish. Okay, I'll tell you how much time does it take for dough to become chametz. Now, one important wrinkle. The time that we are mentioning is only if the dough is left unattended, unmanipulated, not moving. Like we mentioned, when the pasuk says we walked out with doughs on our backs, Pesach Mitzrayim, even if it was for one day, but for that one day, we were not allowed to have chametz. Much more than 80 minutes, right? We walked with doughs on our back, and it never became chametzik. It never became chametzik because we were walking the whole time. Now today they're very makbid. Today they don't say in a matzah bakery, as long as we're moving it, I don't care if it takes 2 hours. That's a chumrah. But when we're speaking about shiurim here, it's about dough that's left resting. So kedei sheyelech adam migdal nunya leTiveria, the time that it takes a person to walk from Migdal Nunya to Tiveria, and how much is that meal? Now we mentioned this in the beginning of brachas, and we have this later in Pesachim. How much is kedei lahalach meal? That's the big question. You have three shiurim. The shortest one is the 18 minutes. The longest one is the 24 minutes. Obviously, here will be machmed. That's what everyone knows. By chametz, 18 minutes. That's the Gemara here. Now, hold on. Why did we have to say the time that it takes you to walk from Migdal Nunya to Tiveria? The Gemara just say a meal. And the answer is, the shiur of the meal can Migdal Nunya about Tiveria. From the beginning, when they said a meal, how much is a meal? Now, I know they didn't have watches. So they needed to give some sort of siman And the siman is the distance from here to there, the time that it takes you to walk it. Okay, and again, we're going to go with the 18 minutes. Now, Chavra, now that we mentioned a shiur connected to distance, Amar Ababo, Amar Abshon ben Lakish, let me give you other halachis not related to Pesach, in which the time that the time that it takes a person to walk, not 1 mil, we'll see over here, 4 mil is used to determine an halacha. We're beginning with 3 dinim. Din number 1 is legabol. The way Rashi explains legabol, the first Rashi under the Gemara, is that it was common for people with raw ingredients to go to a baker and to pay a baker a fee to turn the raw ingredients into bread. Now it's given, or sometimes you have to say that they were spoke. The balabas tells the gabol, the kneader, you give me back breads that are not tamei. I want my breads to be tar. And this doesn't mean that they're kahanim. Many people, even when they ate chulin, they wanted to eat it bitar. Problem is that this person also gave the gabol kalim, the balabas gave the kneader kalim, and the kalim were tamei. Now, we're speaking about kalim that could be traveled in a mikvah. If the closest mikvah is for less than 4 mil, even though it takes the gabel time to schlep the kalim to the mikvah, that was the understanding. It means if I told you, I want you to give me back my breads, bitara, the gabel has to walk to the mikvah, travel the kalim, bring the kalim back, and everything will be done bitara. The moment the mikvah is 4 mil away or more, since he did not pay him an extra fee to toivel the kalim, even though they made up, they're going to do everything betara, yashakoyach, but the kalim were provided by the owner. The mikvah is 4 mil away. That amount of time, the gabel is allowed to give him back his bread betuma. That's the din of the gabel. The next din is tefilla. Rashi teaches tefilla. Now, guys, this is important. This is only for a traveler. You're traveling, and you would like to, to find, as we had in the beginning of Pesachim, that nichnas b'chitoiv, you want to settle in when it's still light. Mincha ma'ariv. Mincha ma'ariv, you want to daven with the minyan. The closest minyan is within 4 mil. You have to keep on traveling in that direction. And even though you wanted to establish your lodging here, no, you got to daven with the minyan. Go to the shul over there. The moment the shul is 4 mil or more further away from you, then you're not mechoyev to go there. We're speaking about a traveler, that's Litfila. And the third is Natilas Yadayim. Pashit, you're washing, you're having a suda. We're speaking about a traveler. Chazal said, right, beginning with Shlomo HaMelech, and this evolved, the Hillel and Shammai, as we all learned together, that we had the Shmoina Asar Davar, that the Yadayim are Sheni, and therefore you have to wash your hands, even when it comes to eating normal bread. If you are traveling and there is water within 4 mil, you have to keep on traveling. If the only water is 4 mil or more, that is when we're very careful to use the setter. That is where we say, cover your hand with a shmata. Today, maybe put on a glove, and then you can touch the bread. So these are the 3 dinim. I know it's 1 mil to 4 mil, but we're giving about the shiurim of distance. A very important machlekes in the Pesachim. What about nowadays that we have cars or you have bicycles? So the time that it takes to get from Migdal Nunya to Tiveria, which is Taka, when you walked it took you 18 minutes. Now you can do it much quicker. All of these shiurim are 4 mil. We accept, we paskin. It's not about distance, it's about time. And if you're going to go, mil is 18 minutes, which means 4 mil is 72 minutes. So halacha l'mayim means if I'm traveling today on the road and there's a minyan, and the minyan is within 72 minutes, I have to go to the minyan. With another nuance that we're going to learn over here. You're quoting Amar Ababo, Amar Abshimon Lakish. You're quoting the wrong name. It wasn't Rabbi that quoted the Rish Lakish. It was Aivu. Number 2, when he quoted the Shimon ben Lakish, it wasn't only regarding the 3 dinim, Gabel, Tefilla, and Natilas Yadayim, but there was a 4th din. What was the 4th din? The din of Ibud. Now, the din of Ibud, for us, it's not that much practice. Ibud means tanning leather. But that's connected to a Mishnah that we learned in Chulin. So now let's chazer some dinim in Chulin. What did we learn in Chulin? That animal skins, the ones that are tender, the ones that are edible, have a din of a cholin. And therefore they are susceptible to becoming tummy. right? However, the moment the skins are being transformed into leather at a certain point, it's no longer called a cholin. And even if a source of tummy touches it, it's not a cholin. So it's not susceptible to the rules. Now, by the way, a final product has a din of a keli. It's also going to become susceptible, but that's different with many differences. First of all, it has to be a ready product. On the other hand, the keli, a final keli, doesn't need to become muhshir with liquids. But there was a point where the hide goes away from it being food, and now it's considered a hide, a pshtickle leather. So we learned in the Mishnah that the kulam she'ibdan, even animal skins that began tender, that had a din of a cholin. But once you begin to transform them by actually doing the steps, we just learned yesterday, you soak it in water and you put over there flour and salt, or even if you didn't soak it in anything. But before you began, you needed to remove the fats from within the hides. And the way they remove the fats then is having people trample on it. They put it on the ground, and when people are walking by, so they began to trample on it. But for how long? For how long? So that's the shiur of time. That if shehilech b'hem kedei avoda, the time that it takes to do leather working avoda, doesn't say in the Mishnah how long is that. So now they're ready to hide it, meaning they're not susceptible to becoming tummy b'tuma seichala. And the only exception is that the hide of a man, God forbid, there it's always tummy, as we learned in Chulin. Very, very unusual expressions people should not make, a keli with the skin of their parents. Anyways, let's go back over here. Now the Mishnah doesn't say how long do people have to trample on these hides for it to lose the status of a cholin. So on that, Amar Rab Aibu, that's the parentheses. It's not inya. Amar Rabbi Yanai, kedei hiluch arba milin. So that's the fourth case where you have the hiluch arba milin. Now, Amar Rabbi Yossi Rab Chanina. And according to Rashi, this limitation is going on 2 of the 4. And the 2 of the 4, which is the dinam of davening, Tefilla b'tzibur, and the dinam of natilas yadayim, guys, this is important. It's only for a traveler. It's different. If a person lives in a location, whole different dinam for both. But when you're traveling, leishanu, that if it's within 4 mil, you have to go. That's elalafanov. That's when you are going. You would have wanted to establish your lodging here. And you're going to the minyan, but the minyan, the shul, the Beis HaKnesses is not in the opposite direction of your trip. It's ahead of you. It doesn't have to be exactly ahead of you, but at least you're not going the opposite direction. You're traveling and you want to eat, and they tell no, go further than 3 mil, there's water. It's within 4 mil, go get the water. That's if the water is ahead of you. But if the water, or if the minyan is in the reverse direction, it's behind you, even if it's only 1 mil away, then you don't have to return. Says Amar Abacha, from this statement, umina, a mil is where you don't have to return. But if it's a drop less than a mil, then yes, then you have to return. Well, even though you're going the opposite direction, both for the minyan and for natilas yadayim, while you're traveling, that's the way Rashi learns the sugya. You can just imagine that. You want to ask something?
Do we have a time frame for what is a meal and 4 million?
Yeah, one meal, I said, is 18 minutes. And we paskin that it's not the distance anymore, because today with a car, you can't say dalad milan. No, we don't say dalad milan. A milan says a kilometer. No, it's about the time that it takes you to walk the mil. But Mela, now it's about zmanim. That's the way most places can apply these dinim today. Okay. Okay. Says the Mishnah. Now, Chaver, this is beginning an amazing sugya. And we have to remember this for God willing for the next daf. Here's the problem. Ketzad mafrishin chala betuma biyomtiv. Yomtiv is Pesach. Person made dough. Today we don't do that. Today we make matzah before Pesach, just in case it becomes chametz. You don't have a problem. Then they made doughs on Yom Tov. They mixed flour and water on Pesach. Obviously, no one, God forbid, wants to make chametz. What happened over here is you're not making chametz. No, it's before it's chametz. But the dough became tamei. So what? Hold on. we have to separate dough, ideally, we have to separate challah, ideally from the dough. And as we'll learn throughout the sugya, even nowadays, if a woman forgot to separate challah from the dough, then she can still separate the challah after the bread is baked. Elama, the dough is one gush, it's one piece. You separate challah from it. Once you bake the breads, every bread is separate. We don't say that you have to separate from every loaf a piece. We don't say that. You put the breads or the matzahs into one basket, into one keli, that combines them, and then you separate the same amount from the whole basket. But that's not something that's ideally done. Ideally, you do it when it's done. But here we got ourselves a problem. In order for the dough not to become chametz, as we just learned above, you have to work it until you bake it, right, Yaakov? Once it's baked, then you can let it rest. On Yom Tov, yes, we all know that to bake food for Yom Tov, gesund to hate, right? The Torah says clearly, then you can do avodah, you can do malachas. But here, challah that's tamei may never be consumed. I know it's mutar b'hana for the kohen, but it can be eaten. So you're not allowed to bake challah if it's tamei. Now it's like a catch-22. What should you do over here? The challah is not chametz yet. So if you can't bake it, it's going to become chametz. Now, and what happens if it becomes chametz? Another issue. Then the owner, maybe, will be oved on bal yirah bal yamatzah. Question is, does it really belong to the owner? Who does it belong to? It belongs to the kahanim, but it doesn't belong to any specific kohen. But you have the problem over here. Okay, let's read inside the Rashi. He explains the problem beautifully. The Rashi under the Tosfos, the bottom of the Yom. The dough became tamei. And now the challah that you removed cannot be given to a kohen. How will you separate a piece of challah? The moment you did it, you got a problem because why can't you bake the challah part of the dough? Because it may never be eaten. On the other hand, say, okay, separate it and leave it. No. Leave it and it's going to become chametz after kedei hiluch mil. And on Yom Tov, so burn it at night? No. How can you burn it at night? How can I allow something to become chametz on Pesach? So hold on. Why didn't you say separate the dough and burn it right away? Because it's tamei already. Says Rashi, you can't do that either. Because there is a klal that something that's kodesh, which includes truma, which includes challah, may never be burnt on Yom Tov. Gewaldig. So you're making a dough. The dough became tamei. What do you do now when it comes to afrashas challah? Now, as we'll learn in a moment, there is another issue. We'll speak of that out in a moment. So here we have it's a three-way machlokas tanoim, but it's a two-way machlokas. Let's go. Rabbi Eliezer holds that this is taka problem. If you were to separate the dough, even though once you separate the dough, you don't own it. You don't really own it. Why not? Because it's not yours. You have to give it to a kohen. I don't care. You didn't give it to a kohen yet. It's in your possession. And like we explained, there's nothing you can do. So therefore, like tikro lo shem at sheteyafa. Don't designate, don't separate challah until after you baked it. And like we mentioned, the last line in Rashi, I know we're going to learn more details on Daf Memches, that you don't have to separate from every loaf of bread a separate piece. You remove it from the oven, all on Yom Tov, you put it in one basket, that combines it, and now separate a piece for the kohen. Now, it's still tamei, but it's not chametz. So when you'll give it to the kohen, he can use it for fuel, gesundheit, but you avoid the chametz issue. You're not allowing it to become chametz. Now, there's another problem here that the Mishnah is not explicitly speaking about. If I did not yet designate challah, I have to designate challah. And like we mentioned, challah cannot be eaten betumah. So when I put all of these doughs, all of these preformed doughs into breads into the oven, don't I know that some of it will become challah? And challah tameya may not be baked. So how can I bake it? So it must be that Rabbi Eliezer holds, since you don't know which one will become challah, which part will become challah, every loaf that you put into the oven, you can say, this will not become the challah. It's the solution of Rabbi Eliezer is predicated on us saying that since you did not yet separate challah, even though one piece will become challah, now you can bake all of it. And even after you separated one piece for challah, you don't say, retroactively you violated the baking on Yom Tov. And then you're not allowed to bake on Yom Tov something that may not be eaten. We don't say that according to Rabbi Eliezer. Now, Ben Beseira agrees with Rabbi Eliezer that if you were to call it challah, and there's nothing you can do other than leaving it, you would violate Bal Yiro Bal Yamatz. He agrees with Rabbi Eliezer in that detail. Elama, he says, don't separate challah after you baked it. There's another way of you making sure that a piece of dough does not become chametz, even though you're not manipulating it, even though you're not working with it. And that is, tatel b'tzoinon, put the piece of challah into cold water. That will prevent it from becoming chametz. It will not rise. Okay, but both Ben Beseira and Rabbi Eliezer hold that if you were to separate a piece of challah, since you can't bake it, so therefore it will become chametz if you don't put it into cold water, you, the owner, you'll violate. However, Amar Rabbi Yeshua, that loy zehu chametz shemuzaron olav bal yiro bal yamatze. I don't see the problem. It's not ideal to separate challah after you bake something. So separate it now. What was the issue? You can't bake it? Yeah, you can't bake it. You can't bake something that cannot be eaten. So what? So you won't bake it. What do you mean, so what? If I'm going to leave it and I'm not going to bake it, it's going to become chametz. So what? You're not going to eat it. Bal yiro bal yamatz, it's not yours. Furthermore, a kohen is violating bal yiro bal yamatz. Which kohen? You didn't give it to a kohen yet. So no one is violating bal yiro bal yamatz. Look inside the top Rashi. The lavdi dehu. The moment he shakara all of shame, the moment he says this is chal, it's not yours. And v'kra ksiv lo yiro alecha, right? It's for you. Shalacha yataraya. V'ze'ena shalacha. And not only that, it's not even shal chavercha. In other words, a goys you can have. Shal gavoya lahavdil you can have. My friend's chametz, it's not my friend's because it's no one specific kohen. You did not transfer it yet. So elama mafrishasa, separate it when it's still in a dough. Umani chasa, you don't have to put it in cold water. Put it on the side until the night. And at night, by the way, at night you're going to give it, the kohen will have to burn it right away when you give it to a kohen. But no problem. Matzah Yom Tov, there's no problem with burning. You can't burn kachim on Yom Tov. You can burn kachim on Cholamayid. You can burn kachim Matzah Yom Tov. And the chmitza. So now we have to first understand that this machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, whether if it were to become chametz, Rabbi Eliezer, and by the way, this includes Ben Beseira, hold that the owner is going to be oiven abal yiro bal yamatza. The question is why? Rabbi Yeshua is right. It's not yours. It's the kohen's. So says the Gemara Lema b'toivas hana komifligen. What is toivas hana? The type of toivas hana is benefit of gratitude. I'm a Yisrael. I'm obligated to give trumas or meisers and challah. The Torah does not demand of me to give it to any specific kohen. I get to choose which kohen I give it to. Is that something that considers me a owner in? I have equity in that which I have to give to a kohen. How is this equity? So even though a kohen is not allowed to pay me for me to give to him or to her that truma or that challah, you're not allowed to do that, even if it's a minimal amount of money. But a non-kohen is allowed to pay me a little amount of money. It's called toivas hana. How little, it's not clear. A small amount of money, a tip, for me to give my truma, including my challah, to that kohen, to that specific kohen. Why would another Jew tip me? Either because he's a chaver of his. The example Chazal give is that it's common for a Yisrael to have a kohen grandson. Because if someone's daughter married a kohen, then the grandchildren will be kohanim. As long as the money is not coming from a kohen, that tip can be given to me. In other words, if I own challah, it's not that I will get tipped. I'm allowed, if the opportunity will come up, I can monetize the schus that God gave me to whom to give it to. It can become value. It can become monetized. The question is, does that mean that I own it? If you have something in your possession that the Torah says it's not yours, you have to give it away. But you theoretically, you can get value from it. You can make it into money. is that shot that you have equity in it, Gavaldik. That's the machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer holds Teves Hana is called mammon. It's as if you have equity. So therefore, if you're going to separate challah when it's dough, and you won't be allowed to bake it because you can't bake on Yom Tov that which is not edible, and therefore it's going to become chametz, even though it's challah has to be gifted to the kohen. It's also yours. So you're going to violate Bali Ro Bali Matzah. So he gives the solution of first bake it and then separate challah with the other issue that we'll speak out again, even though that's also a problem. However, Rabbi Yeshua holds, B'chlal, Teves Hana is not called mammon. Just because I am allowed to receive a small amount of money from a non-kohen, and that will, and I'll receive the money to choose the kohen of the gifter of the monies, the gifter of the tip's choice, it doesn't mean that I own equity in the challah. It's not mine. If it's not mine, I don't care if it becomes chametz. L'chayra, that's the machlokes, says the Gemara. No, meaning it's not necessarily the argument, because this issue of Teves Hana, whether it's considered mammon or not, right? We would prefer not to make this into a machlokes tanoim. The kula alma, I can tell you, everyone holds that Teves Hana is not mammon. However, here we begin. Here there's a principle called since. The hoyel principle, komiflagi. What's the sins that Rabbi Eliezer Savar that we say hoyel? What's the hoyel? Separating trumas umaisis, including challah, is like any other neder. That means that if a person separates and they go in front of a beis din and they have a Pesach and they explain why their separation, they regret that they made that separation, a beis din can be matir the neder, so to say, and retroactively undo that separation. So hoyel here is a problem because Rabbi Yeshua is arguing it doesn't belong to the owner. He already designated it as challah. The challah doesn't belong, it belongs to a kohen. You get to choose which kohen to give it to, but it's not yours. It's not true. That since we say hoyel and ve'i boye itchalei Allah, the owner, so to say, can go in front of a beis din and annul its challah's designation retroactively. So then it's mamoine. It's so much mamoine that even if you did not annul it, it's yours. You're violating Bali Ro Bali Matzah. Rabbi Yeshua Savar that we don't subscribe to the principle of hoyel, and therefore it's designated as chal. It's not yours. Let it become chametz. Again, just to speak out again, the Rashi here speaks out importantly because we're going to have this later on Daf Mem Ches, that there is another huge issue here. It's really two arguments between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. The Gemara here is focusing only on why is it the Bechlal a problem. And for that, first option was Teves Hana komiflagi. Second option is that in the principle of hoyel komiflagi. But again, like we mentioned when we learned the Mishnah, there's another machlokes, and that is, according to Rabbi Eliezer's solution, which is that first bake it and then separate challah, Rabbi Yeshua holds you are not allowed to do it. Not only there is no need to do it, which is what the Gemara is saying, because it's not yours, Rabbi Yeshua holds you're not allowed to do it. Because since you are putting in the oven something that was not yet chalad, and you have to separate challah, some of it will become challah, and challah that's tameh may never be baked on Yom Tov. So according to Rabbi Yeshua, you can't put anything in the oven because you are going to be baking something that may not be baked, because challah tameh may not be eaten. Rabbi Eliezer has to subscribe to something else, that you are allowed when you put every loaf from the oven to say, this will not become challah, that will not become challah. And that's matter you to put everyone. Once you already baked it and now you are mafresh challah, we don't say that retroactively you violated that. That's another machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua that the Gemara here is not yet addressing. Let's go back to it. We're going to now focus on this hoyel principle.
Quick question.
Yes.
In theory, if someone cooks on Yom Tov, he's allowed to cook extra. He doesn't cook exactly how much he thinks.
Rabbi Chaim, exactly. That's the whole hemshech. And that's what let's go fight.
But
exactly,
because your kohen might come.
Rabbi Chaim, the Gemara is speaking about what you just mentioned. Wait. That's mamish the hemshech. Perfect. So says the Gemara, Itmar, this issue of hoyel, which is exactly like you mentioned, cooking on Yom Tov, guys, like this, cooking on Yom Tov for the weekday is prohibited. Even though we say that l'tzorech echol nefesh and noch we paskin like Beis Hillel mitoich shehutra l'tzorech chutra na mishaloi l'tzorech, that means, my friends, if I'm making food, it's food to be eaten on Yom Tov. What's going to happen? Itmar ha'oifem Yom Tov l'chol mamash. But Yom Tov L'chol will mean, like Rashi gives an example, that a person ate on Yom Tov, I'm full, I'm satisfied. Tomorrow, tonight is Matzah Yom Tov. I know that what I am baking or cooking will not be eaten up by me or my family. I know that. So can you bake mi Yom Tov L'chol? Now, if you taka did it mi Yom Tov L'chol, we're going to go over here, you're violating a lav. Yechayev Malkus, unlike Shabbos. For Shabbos b'mezid, there's Kodesh, God forbid. Schila. B'shoigeg Chatos. By Yom Tov, b'mezid, there's no b'mezid Yechayev Malkus, and for Shoigeg, you're not Chayev a carbon, because you only Yechayev a carbon Chatos. If b'mezid you're Chayev Kodesh, for Yom Tov, there's no Isur Kodesh. Okay? But if you do it b'mezid, Yechayev Malkus. So the Machlekes Hamiroim, Rabbi Chizda says, Loika. We don't say Mitoich Shehutra. No, it has to be for Yom Tov. And Rabbi says, Eino Loika. Now, why does Rabbi say Eino Loika? So Rabbi Chizda says, Loika. Lo yomrinen hoyelu mikloi lei orchim chazilei. I'm not going to eat it today. But what were to happen if guests come into my house? Then I would need more food today. So Rabbi is the one that ascribes to hoyel. Here hoyel will be lakula. Since if guests come, I'll give it to the guests. So therefore, even though I don't know of guests coming, the fact that if it's done for guests and guests come, that means that the act of baking and cooking itself is not inherently a problem, right? It has to do with some other reason, because it won't be eaten. Maybe it will be eaten. Rabbi Chizda does not subscribe. He rejects hoyel. And therefore, Yechayev Malkus. Rabbi Amar Eino Loika, because Rabbi does subscribe to the principle of hoyel, because Amrinan hoyel. And now, Amar Le Rabbi to Rabbi Chizda, you reject the hoyel principle. Lidi doch the Amrat. Lo Amrinan hoyel. I bechlal don't understand. How do we bake from Yom Tov to Shabbos? Yeah, we'll learn a Masechtas Beitza, the whole sugi of Erev Tavshilin. So Bekitzer, Erev Tavshilin means that if you begin baking and cooking prior to Yom Tov for Shabbos, and therefore what you do on Yom Tov is going to be a continuation from something that you already begun prior. That is something that Chazal allow you to do. But let me tell you one rule. Eruv Tavshilin only works if the problem prior to the Eruv is only a rabbinic problem. If there is an Isur Mido Oiraisa to do something on Yom Tov for Shabbos, Chazal can never take away an Isur Doiraisa. They cannot be matter an Isur Doiraisa. Oh, so now it's very good. According to Rabbi, he Bechal holds of Hoyel. Hoyel means that you're not Chayiv Malkus. Now, by the way, Rabbi is not saying you are allowed to do it L'chatchila. Absolutely not. Cooking or baking miyam tov l'choil, you're violating a derabanan. Rabbi is saying that the hoil takes it down a notch. You're not going to be like because if guests were to come, hoil. Now, according to Rabbi, since hoil already transforms the baking, the cooking only into a derabanan, so then the Chachamim can say that if you're not making Erev Tavshilin, the Chachamim have a right to undo their gezeres. We're not going to be geyser anymore. But according to you, Rabbi Chizda, that you're like I don't care that you made an Erev Tavshilin. An Erev Tavshilin can never work if the Isur is an Isur Doiraisa. Beautiful. So because of that, Amar Lei, Rabbi Chizda says, what do you mean? Erev Tavshilin. So counters Rabbi, like we just explained. That can't be. Erev Tavshilin, which is a rabbinic solution, can only resolve a rabbinic problem. You can't undo an Isur Doiraisa. So Amalei, here we go. How one is linked to the other. Says Rabbi Chizda, I'll tell you. Mido Doiraisa tzorchei Shabbos nasen b'yontiv. Yes, tzorchei yontiv. Yontiv cannot be used for the weekday. And if you use it for the weekday, if not for hoyol, everyone holds Yechayev Malkus. But you know what? If you are baking or cooking from Yontiv to Shabbos, like Rashi tells us in the second line under the Gemara, that since Shabbos and Yom Tov, according to Rabbi Chizda, are both holy, it's considered one day. It's one set of holiness. Kedusha Achas, says Rashi. And since Kedusha Achas, then Mido Oiraisa, not Midrabanan, Mido Oiraisa, you are allowed to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. So it's beautiful. Now, Midrabanan, you may not. Let's get this clear. Without an Erev Tavshilin. but now each one has their notes. Erev Tavshilin works. Erev Tavshilin can only work if the problem to begin with is only a rabbinic problem. Mamish Gavaldik. Rabbi holds that it's an Isur Dairaisa to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. But Hoyel. Hoyel is an Isur Darabanan. Erev Tavshilin is Muta Legamri. Rab Chizda doesn't subscribe to Hoyel. But on the other hand, Rab Chizda holds that yes, from Yom Tov to the week is Asur Dairaisa, but from Yom Tov to Shabbos, on a biblical level, no problem. So also it's only a Darabanan. So if I did Erev Tavshilin works, the Rabbanan, who the Gaz reads is all Rab Chizda, really, Midrash you can cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. From Yom Tov to Shabbos, because like Rashi says, Chado Kedushahi. But Rabbanan, who the Gaz away, and why did the Chachama make Gzeira? Gzeira Shema Yomru Oifim Yom Tov Af L'Choyel. People might cook, bake from Yom Tov to the weekday. And the Kivin, that's the Rabbanan Ruva Tavshilin. Therefore, there is an Hakedah. Guys, let's hop on and let's go weiter. Eisvei, this is the Kasha from Rabba against Rab Chizda again. Rab Chizda rejects the Hoyel principle. It says in Abraisa, Behema misukenes, if you have an animal that's about to die, and here again, you already ate on Yom Tov, you don't need to eat today. Now, normally, why would you shecht an animal if you don't need to eat it? But here, you, the owner, understands that if you will not shecht it now, the animal might die without shchita. Why do we call that nevela? You will use the value of the animal. So you would prefer to shecht it. Says the Tana, says the Braisa, lo yishchoit. Only if there's enough time still on Yom Tov for you to eat it in the quickest way it takes to eat it. Now, by the way, we have to do melicha, right? Melicha takes a lot of time. But we also learned in Chulen that melicha only is needed to take out the dam if you're going to cook it. If you roast it, till today, you don't have to do melicha. We're just giving an example. The quickest way for you to make it edible, if there's still enough time for you to potentially be allowed to eat it, then you're allowed to do it. So now, says the Gemara, Yochel Lechel, that's what the Braisa is implying. Yochel Lechel doesn't mean that you are going to eat it. The Braisa uses the words, you have to be able to eat it. Now that works with Hoyel. So Bishwaima says that that means Hoyel v'i boyel lemechel. If you would have wanted to eat it, then you would be able to eat it. So Mishumacha yishchait. And we're relying on Hoyel. But according to Rab Chizda, you reject the Hoyel principle, the Amrat limited in Hoyel. How are you allowed to shecht it? Guys, if we're not speaking about Shabbos afterwards, this Braisa is Hoyel. Even Rab Chizda that says that Yom Tov l'Shabbos biblically is permitted, not Yom Tov l'Choyel. So Amar Le Rab Chizda responds, no, because you're going to lose money. Says Rabbi, what are you talking about? Hefset of money by Yedin Doiraisa? Umishum hefset l'mayne sharin and Isura Doiraisa. Says Rab Chizda, no, it's not a Doiraisa. You are satisfied. You would not have wanted to eat anything else. But hold on, you also know that if you won't be allowed to shecht it right now, you will lose the value of your animal. You know what happens? You get an appetite. You understand, I want to eat it. Amalei in Mishum hefset memainai gomar beliboy lechel kazayas. And you're going to lose a lot of money if you're not going to want to eat it. Mitamol, you have an appetite. Now you want to eat it. And once you want to eat it, today on Yom Tiv, you have to shecht the whole animal because the efshel kazayas basabaloy shchita. So we're leaving off over here in the sugi of Hoyel, Machlokes, the way one option in the Mishnah is that Hoyel is a Machlokes Tanoim, but it's clearly befeidish or Machlokes between Rabba and Rab Chizda. Rabba subscribes to the Hoyel principle and Rab Chizda rejects the Hoyel principle.